And what I find very puzzling is that the United States has got the world's best universities, the world's best think tanks, the world's best newspapers, but it doesn't listen to the world. And that's what Chinese society has worked out over 4,000 years. So when you travel around China, a lot of the discipline and order that you see in Chinese society is something that is desired by the population. And the best way, this is the most important point, if you want China to behave better, don't insult them in public, talk to them privately.
For years, the West has told us one clear story about China. China has no human rights. From Xinjiang to censorship to government control, the message has been repeated again and again that ordinary Chinese citizens are living under a system with little freedom. But what if the story is not that simple? What if the way the West defines human rights is not the only way to look at it? Singaporean diplomat and scholar Kishore Mahbubani believes many people misunderstand China because they judge it through a purely Western lens. He argues that behind the headlines, there is a much more complicated reality, one that many people outside China rarely see. So, is China really as oppressive as the West claims? Or have we been looking at China from only one side? Let's hear what Professor Kishore Mahbubani has to say.
Another issue, though, the biggest issue probably that comes up in the realm of human rights in the American conversation is, of course, the situation with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. What I assume that that's one of the things that the Chinese leadership and maybe many of the Chinese people don't want to be lectured about by the United States. How do they perceive that? Is it that they just frame the whole issue otherwise, or they think we don't understand why they've resorted to what they're doing, or do they think we're exaggerating what they're doing, or what? Do you have any sense for what the Chinese perception of the Uyghur situation is?
Well, the Chinese perception of the Uyghur situation is that the United States, when it was attacked after 9/11, decided to respond partly as an act of revenge, partly as an act of deterrence by invading Afghanistan and then invading Iraq, right? And it was seen as a retaliation against the 9/11 attack. The Chinese were subject to similar attacks from Uyghur separatists and so on and so forth. So when I was in Shanghai, I was told China also had its 9/11 moment. And that's when China decided to say, this will stop. This won't happen. And what's interesting is that the Americans say that the Chinese are not respecting the rights of Muslims in Xinjiang. Now, when the United States in the Cold War accused the Soviet Union of suppressing the Muslims in Afghanistan, the Muslim world agreed with the Soviet Union and supported the United States. Today, when the United States says that China is suppressing the Muslims of Xinjiang, not one Muslim government has agreed with the United States. And this is, we have a very strange situation in the world. Again, future historians will remark on this, that you have a bunch of Christian countries going to the UN expressing concern over the Muslims in Xinjiang, and 37 countries or 39 countries, including mostly Muslim countries, saying we understand what China is doing.
Now, some people might say that that's because a lot of Muslim countries need commercial engagement with China, or for various other reasons don't want to offend China. I suspect the Muslim country that's come closest to taking issue with China over this is Turkey, because there is an ethnic connection there. And I just want to focus on this for 1 second, because I want people to understand what China thinks the issue is. Okay, so the Uyghurs are Turkic people, and the separatists among them focus on that probably as much as Islam as a reason for wanting to actually carve off a part of what China considers China and divorce China. So I gather you said their 9/11. There was what there was some kind of terrorist attack or something explicitly over the separatist issue that I gather what was this the thing where it was like a mass stabbing and like 100 people were killed or something? This is the thing I'm thinking of?
I don't have the precise figures.
Yeah.
You can Google and get the figures. But it was a traumatic event for the Chinese because the Chinese, as you know, if you ever go to China, you'll see how they live with great security. There are very few police around, very few people carrying any kinds of arms around or guns around. And then suddenly to have that kind of peace being disrupted by these mass killings, of course, that was a shocking moment for them. Now, you mentioned Turkey. By the way, Turkey is no longer part of that. Turkey didn't sign the letter that was drafted by the United States and Europeans.
Oh, did they take their name off it? There was a letter they signed, I thought, but
I think they were critical for a while, and then they have now changed their position. But just by the way, a very quick point about the fact that the Muslim countries may be indebted to China. Saudi Arabia is not indebted to China. Saudi Arabia is an American ally. Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the holy mosque. And I think this is one thing that I think many Americans find very difficult, to respect the intelligence of other states, which may be making decisions not necessarily on commercial grounds, but on purely rational grounds, saying, what will the 21st century be like? Who will we have to live with? And how do we work out a long-term relationship with China? And so I think that the countries that are making intelligent, thoughtful, rational decisions. And what I find very puzzling is that the United States has got the world's best universities, the world's best think tanks, the world's best newspapers, but it doesn't listen to the world. Amazing. It doesn't understand that there has been a sea change in the whole world's perceptions and attitudes towards China. Now, it doesn't mean, by the way, that they love China. It doesn't mean that they're going to become supplicant to China, but they understand that the return of China is the single biggest historic event, probably of the last 200 years, together with the return of Asia, I want to add, by the way. As you know, I've just come out with a book called The Asian 21st Century or so. And so this is the big change, and we all are adjusting and adapting to it as intelligently as possible. And all these countries that are treating China with respect want to have good relations with the United States also. Mm-hmm. They want to see a strong United States, but they don't want the United States to say, you're either with me or you're against me.
China is used to having kind of civil security, internal security with very few police. Americans think of China as this surveillance state that, whether or not you see a lot of police with weapons walking around, is a state that, has cameras everywhere, has the social credit system monitoring people's behavior and so on, and so is oppressive in that sense. And perhaps relatedly, they might say, well, Americans, okay, so 100 people were killed in a terrorist attack, but still, the what's apparently going on or has gone on in Xinjiang is, by American lights, seems massively oppressive. We hear numbers like 1 million Uyghurs. Americans use the term concentration camps, which I think is misleading given what it suggests, given the resonance it has from World War II. That's not what these are like, but still, it is internment. It is involuntary confinement, apparently. So I just, you want to address either of those kind of closely related things?
If the United States had the same ratio of people to arable land as China, United States wouldn't have 330 million people, United States would have 4 billion people. Now, he said if you have 4 billion people living in the United States, it'll be very crowded. And you therefore want to have more discipline, more order, more rules. And that's what Chinese society has worked out over 4,000 years. So when you travel around China, a lot of the discipline and order that you see in Chinese society is something that is desired by the population. Because in the Chinese mind, the one lesson of 4,000 years of history is that China does its most when there's chaos, when there's luan. And so the Chinese have this incredible deep aversion to chaos. And they love order and predictability and stability. And that's why in most cities, there are not many policemen.
Yeah.
And you walk around and there's no crime.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can go around Shanghai anywhere at night and nobody's going to rob you. And that's not because there are lots of policemen. It's because there's a culture that has developed in the society. And it's a very tough discipline. By the way, if you do break the law, the punishment is harsh. But that also ensures that very few people break the law.
Yeah.
So you can understand that when you talk of human rights, from the point of view of the Chinese people, and especially if you take human rights in the broadest philosophical sense, I studied philosophy, as you know. The first right, as you know, is the right to live, the right to eat, the right to be housed, the right to an education, the right to medical things. And now all these rights, more fundamental rights, the Chinese people didn't have, for the last 2,000 years. And today, for the first time in 3,000 to 4,000 years, China eradicated poverty. Zero. Now, that's one of the most incredible, impressive achievements in human history. And I want to tell you, just to emphasize why this is so important to me. When I grew up in Singapore, now Singapore is very wealthy. The per capita income of Singapore was $500. When I went to school at the age of 6, I was put on a special feeding program because I was technically undernourished, because I came from a poor family in a poor Singapore. And, we didn't have a flush toilet. We had gangsters killing each other on our doorstep. So I lived through third world poverty. And I can tell you, when you have that kind of poverty, you don't ask, do I have the right to vote? Do I have the right to, speak out? In first one, you're more interested in surviving, getting the most basic needs. And in the evolution of Asian societies has shown that as you first got to deliver all this, then things change. And things will evolve. And China can also evolve. And the best way, this is the most important point. If you want China to behave better, don't insult them in public. Talk to them privately. And say, hey, we have some concerns. And Xinjiang, for example, I would say, yes, it's right to express concerns about Xinjiang. But, I've learned in life that you can either try to feel good or you can try to do good. You can feel good by condemning China and Xinjiang, but you can do good by talking to them privately and say, hey, can you think there's a better ways of managing this? And in the past, by the way, I think I heard a podcast interview with Susan Thornton, where she said there's been a very deep study done to show that the years of United States engagement with China did work and did result in Chinese changing their behavior on many issues through the process of quiet engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I recommend for the United States.